You're thinking about getting a car, and it's so difficult to decide which option to take. You have gone into a dealership and they throw all these numbers at you. And again, remember, the dealership is always trying to make the most money out of you. So you're trying to decide which option works for you and what option gives you the best value for the money that you have. Buying a car right now is very, very expensive. I mean, everything is so expensive, but buying a car, especially right now with demand being so high, it's really, really hard to get a good car. So you want to make sure that you make the best decision for this investment that you're making to make sure you get the most value for your money. So I've done the research, I have performed an analysis that will best inform the decision that you want to make among the different options that you have when you're trying to buy a car. So let's get into it. Now, if you're trying to buy a car right now, there are three factors that will impact the total cost. The first thing is interest. So how the interest that you're going to be charged, whether you finance or you lease, will impact the total cost of the car. So if you have bad credit, for instance, you're going to be charged a higher interest because they view you as a riskier buyer. So when you walk into the dealership, they'll give you the value of the car and then they'll tell you how much interest they'll charge you if you decide to finance or lease. Now, the higher the interest, the higher the total cost of the car, and vice versa, where if you have good credit, the lower the interest rate, the lower the total cost of the car. The second thing is the residual value of the car. The residual value of the car is the value of the car at the end of the lease term or the financing lease. Now, this will impact the total cost of the car when you perform the analysis, and that's why it's important. Now, when you buy a new car, immediately when you drive off the lot, the car loses 20% of its value. That's depreciation. And then 15% thereafter for 3 years. So this is something you also have to think about when you're buying a car. Would you want to buy a new car versus a used car? I always think that it's best to go with a used car because that way the depreciation has already been taken care of by the first buyer. Now, don't buy a really old car. You want to buy a car that's reliable, but at the same time, you do want to think about that as you walk into a dealership where you're deciding if you want to buy a new car versus a used car. Now, the third thing that will impact the total cost of the car will be the term that you use when you finance or when you lease. The longer the term, the higher the total cost of the car, and vice versa. That's because if you extend the monthly payments that you make over maybe a 5-year period versus 3 years, you pay more when you have a longer term. So think about that also when you're making this decision. And now, before we start the analysis, there are some assumptions that we're going to make. The first one is that you'll be buying a mid-size SUV, which is a Toyota RAV4, currently valued at about $30,000 based on Toyota's dealership. This is straight from their dealership website. Number two, you'll have very good credit, so you have about a 700 credit score. You'll be charged 6.9% interest if you decide to finance or to lease. Again, this is on the Toyota website. And then also we are going to be leasing or financing the car for 3 years. So this is just an assumption we're making. And then lastly, you'll be putting down a deposit of $5,000 if you do decide to finance or to lease. So the first analysis we'll do is if you decide to buy the car outright. So you're going to go into your savings account, you're going to get $30,000 out, and you're going to go and give them a cashier's check, and you're going to drive away with a car. Now, this is a new car off the lot. Remember, if you do buy a new car, you do incur that depreciation cost right off the bat. If you do buy the car with your savings, you have peace of mind because you don't have to worry about interest rates. You don't have to worry about a monthly payment. You're one and you're done. Now, the con of this is the opportunity cost. You could invest this money. You could save this money in a high yield savings account. You could save it in a regular account. There is a cost attached to buying the car right out. First option is buying the car with your savings. Now, it will cost you $30,000. There's no deposit. There's no monthly payment because you're buying the car with your savings. Now, the total spent will be $30,000. We mentioned that residual value, which is the value of the car at the end of the lease term, which is 3 years, as we mentioned earlier. So the value of the car at the end of 3 years will be $17,000 based on a depreciation of 20% the first year and then 15% for year 2 and year 3. The opportunity cost that I calculated will be $452.70, and this year we are assuming that is a 0.5 interest rate because you would have held your money in a regular savings account. So again, this is where I would caution you, if you have money, put it in a high yield savings account. Investing, you'd always make so much more on those accounts than in a regular savings account. Now, the actual cost after all this would be $13,452.70. The next option is financing the car, where you put down a deposit and then you finance the rest. So if you do decide to finance with the dealership, they would charge you a 6.99 interest rate, where we are assuming you have very good credit. So let's look at the numbers. So if you do decide to finance, it's $30,000 again. The deposit is $5,000, so you would be financing the remainder $25,000, and then your monthly payment at the 6.99 interest rate would be $773, which is principal plus interest. The total spent after 3 years would be $32,228. Now, if the residual value after 3 years is $17,000, your actual cost would be $15,228. The last option is leasing. Now, leasing is like renting the car because at the end of the lease term, you actually don't own the car, so you don't really have to worry about the residual value. However, if you do lease the car, there are restrictions on how much mileage you can put on the car in a given year, and then there are also restrictions on where you can repair the car. So the dealership may ask that you go to a specific mechanic, which may end up being a lot more money than if you were to repair the car yourself or take it to a mechanic that you know. So that is something to also think about. If you do take the leasing option, it's going to cost you $30,000. You'll put down a deposit of $5,000. Your monthly payment comes to about $377. And remember, again, it may look lower than the monthly payment you make when you finance, but wait a minute. Your total spend will be $18,572. Now, at the end of the lease, you will not have really a residual value because you don't own the car. So the actual cost for you will be the $18,572. So now that we completed the analysis, you can see that it actually costs you more to lease than to finance or to buy. And that's because, again, leasing is like renting the car. You don't own the car after the lease term is done. So I would say if you have the option to buy the car right out, buy it right out. I hate paying interest on anything because then you're paying this person more than the value of the car is. Now, if you do have to finance because you don't have the savings, make sure you have a good credit score. Make sure you can go and negotiate when you go into the dealership. Make sure you try to get the best value for your money. Always, always negotiate. If this was helpful, please like it, please share it, and please subscribe. Thank you.